You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
So I have a bit of a different Star Trek story for you today. Listener Anne and I have been chatting back and forth about her experiences as a blind Star Trek fan. So rather than me telling you about it, I figured it's probably better to just hear it from her yourself. So I invited Anne to be on the show, and we had a nice conversation about her experiences, about what she thinks about Star Trek's depiction of disabilities, particularly blindness, and also what she would consider to be good representation of blindness in Star Trek. She also let me in on what she does to help her enjoy Star Trek more as a blind person and a fan. So let's hear from Anne. So Anne, you're a consumer of daily Star Trek news. You watch the show. You're always constantly retweeting us on Twitter, and I appreciate that. You and I have been talking a little bit for a while, and now I just really wanted to bring you on the show and talk about your experiences, because we have had some really interesting discussions about Star Trek, and in particular the way it treats differently abled people. So can you just give me an introduction? Tell me about your story. How did you... I can't remember now how we even kind of started talking. Do you remember?
First of all, I just want you to know, Allison, I am honored to be on your podcast. I can't tell you how much this means to me. To answer your question, how did we start talking? Well, I found you in January or February, after I knew that Janeway was, 2021. After I knew that Janeway was coming back in Star Trek Prodigy. Maybe I should just start there. Star Trek, without telling you my whole first contact story, Star Trek didn't mean anything to me when it was just Next Generation or, whatever was there. One Saturday night in February or March of 1995, I'm this 15-year-old doing dishes, and my family's watching their TV show in the other room. And all of a sudden, it just grabbed my attention, something about sick bay and this doctor and et cetera, et cetera. And by the end of that episode of Star Trek Voyager, I had decided to join my family in watching the show, and, if you will, met Captain Janeway for the first time. And I'm like, this Captain Janeway woman, I got to come back for her next week. So I embraced Star Trek Voyager and Captain Janeway. And Captain Janeway has always been my favorite character. I'm not even a diehard Star Trek fan. I'm a diehard Catherine Janeway fan. And when I found out, and when I found out she was coming back on Prodigy, it was November or something of 2020. And I'm like, am I hearing this right? Oh my God, I'm all over this. But I found out on an hour-long Star Trek podcast, because I had searched my podcatcher of choice for Star Trek. And I gleaned this piece of news out of this. They just happened to put it in the title of the podcast that was lasting, each episode lasted an hour or so. And I'm like, I do not want to spend an hour out of every week listening to a podcast. But oh my God, any information about Star Trek Prodigy, especially now that I know that Janeway's involved, tell me all about it. Tell me everything you know. And then I did another search a few months later for Star Trek podcasts, and I found this beautiful little 15-minute per episode, sweet little bite-sized thing called Daily Star Trek News. I'm like, thank you.
That is how a lot of people come to us. They're like,
and
I don't have time.
You'll keep me. I don't have time for all of this, but any Prodigy news that you can get, I trust that you will keep me posted. Yeah. And you have not let me down. You've been my source for news, and thank you so much. And thank you all the more for deciding that I was worth inviting onto the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And so you and I have been talking in particular about blindness accessibility. I don't know the right terms. I apologize. And it's something that before I ever met you has actually been a concern for our show, because we, I don't know if you notice, every time if there's trailers and stuff like that, we always try to describe what's happening, because I've had feedback from other listeners that having that description of the teaser or whatever is really helpful for people who are partially sighted or blind. And so that's something that we've always added in. And then I don't know how exactly you and I started talking about it. Well, and now it's the team of writers who do that. But so it's always been something that's interested me personally in providing that as a service to folks who are partially sighted. And you and I got to talking about not just accessibility of like the Star Trek shows in general, but then also we started talking about how Star Trek actually treats people with disabilities or different abilities, and you had some thoughts on that. So what I would like to hear from you, if you could give us a little bit of background on, because you're sight impaired, right? Could you tell me about a little bit about just generally your experiences with that, and then also like how you consume Star Trek? I'm interested in that too.
Well, as a matter of fact, let's just call it like it is. I'm blind. I'm like 100% like, I'm totally blind. I believe totally blind is the correct word. But yeah, I've been blind from birth due to extreme early birth. I was born like, 4 or 5 months early. I'm a miracle baby. Wow. And it was either let me die or put so much oxygen in the incubator I was in trying to keep me alive that they would burn out my retinas. So I lost my sight between, I don't know, seconds, minutes, hours, days at most after birth. I've not seen a day in my life. And Star Trek, at first, my family and I, for what was left of the first season, again, it was February or March of 95. So it was like 6th or 7th episode or something of season 1. I can tell you which episode it was if you wanted to know.
Of course I want to know.
The point is,
was it?
There was something as Phage started, or maybe not started, but Neelix is being attacked. They're rushing him to sick bay. The holographic doctor is trying to treat him. Captain Janeway is taking on this mission of finding whoever took his lungs and getting them back. That's
right. I remember that episode.
Somewhere in the midst of that, my attention got grabbed from the other room.
Right.
And I'll just go ahead and tell you my first contact story.
So please do.
I'm supposed to be doing dishes. I'm standing in front of the sink. Theoretically, I'm doing dishes, but somewhere along the line, hearing all of this commotion on the TV, and you got to remember, well, you don't have to remember because you never knew this about me. I almost went into medical transcription. I've been interested in medical stuff for a long time. Yeah. And so here I am trying to follow this medical saga in the other room. Theoretically, I'm supposed to be washing dishes. My uncle got wise to it. He said, why don't you finish those dishes so you can come out here and watch this with us? I'm like, okay. So that first season, most weeks we sat down together as a family and watched it. When we couldn't do that, I would watch it at my grandfather's house. And back then there was either no such thing as audio description, or it was nowhere near as widely available as it is now. I'm so happy that now that they have Star Trek Prodigy and Star Trek Discovery, even those are available with audio description. So if you know how to set that up, you can get it with audio description. I don't know if Voyager ever was retroactively created with audio description, but the point is, if I wasn't sitting with someone who was sighted watching it with me, I would just kind of take what I could from the dialogue. And, because obviously I couldn't see it. And you and I got to talking about, well, yeah, what I think this whole saga of us actually talking started with the weekly, when daily Star Trek news in a way became weekly Star Trek news, and therefore got so much more interactive with the chat. And I am no stranger to interacting with YouTube live streams by then, and I started interacting with the chat. And the first thing that happened was, so what video game, what was it? There was a poll that you had going, what video game would you be crazy about or something? And I was like, well, instead of answering the poll, I'm going to say something in the chat that video games, when I think about video games, I just think of things that blind people can't connect with. And that may or may not be true. To be fair, there may be some video game creators that may have created accessible video games. I'm not that much of a gamer. I'm not a gamer at all, really, but I do know of someone who is blind and is. So obviously it's doable. But my response was, if I was into gaming and if I had any reason to believe that it was accessible to the blind, I might consider trying out Star Trek Legends. Potentially, I might get a Apple Arcades subscription for that. And you're like, we should talk. I'd like to talk to you more about that. And we emailed back and forth about that. And then 3 weeks ago, and even 4 weeks ago, Paramount Plus did it, and then you did it. You had this thing going on where you said, Paramount Plus said, if you were on a starship, you said in your poll, if you were on the Enterprise crew, bridge crew, what job would you want?
Right.
And again, instead of answering your poll, Allison, I said in the chat, what position can I have?
Yeah.
What kind of job could a blind person have on a starship? I don't like the fact that the Federation theoretically has cured blindness. I want the Federation to embrace people of all kinds, including disabilities, and find a place for us. And let me just go ahead and say this. Geordi LaForge, I don't know much about, I'm semi-familiar with the Next Generation, but I'm familiar enough to know that Geordi LaForge, theoretically, he's supposed to be just like me, born blind or blind from birth. And yet, a great character, fabulous chief engineer, but he literally knew his way around his engine room because he had this thing he threw over his eyes and lived as a sighted person, even though he was supposed to be blind.
Right.
Okay. As a person who's been blind my whole life, I'm not okay with that. I mean,
because what does that say about you and your...
What does that say about me and people like me who maybe, if I was ordered to undergo a procedure where my sight was suddenly restored, I would be worried about what that would do. All of a sudden, I just celebrated my 42nd birthday. That means I've
Happy
lived
birthday,
for
by the
42
way.
years. Thank you. I've lived for 42 years, never having seen a day in my life. So all of a sudden you throw all this sensory, all these crazy images, all this stimulation at my brain that has never faced any of that. What would that do? What kind of effect would that have?
So I have a question for you. Is the issue here one of autonomy and... Okay, I'm going to read between the lines. What it feels like is that maybe by insisting that we can cure blindness in the 24th century, that there's kind of an abled supremacy, right? That being able to see is normal and not being able to see is not normal. And that kind of is at odds with what we think of Star Trek ideals, right? So
the Federation, yeah, the Federation, first of all, it's my life right now. I'm faced with situations where I'm like, well, I wonder, maybe sighted people would have problems doing this, that, or another thing. But as a blind person, I feel like I depend on people even more because they can see what's going on and I can't. And my biggest issue in current life is figuring out, okay, who am I going to get to drive me there, or how am I going to arrange, what transportation do I have to arrange there? You went on a scientific tangent a few weeks ago about how Star Trek is largely things that we haven't invented yet, but that's everything except the transporter. We're never going to live to see the day that there's a transporter.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about science to have any kind of leg to stand on to argue with you, but you don't know how much I want to be able to just say Verdine to workplace and to workplace. Beam me on over. And the office coordinator at my workplace could have me like next to her desk or even at my workstation in 0.5 seconds.
Right.
And the bottom line is, in this future where there's warp drive and holograms and Captain Janeway and a blind engineer who lives like a sighted person, I mean, that seems to say to me, here's a cure for your blindness. Now go be as useful of an officer as the rest of your sighted crewmates. What if a person's not perfectly able-bodied? Are they thrown out of Starfleet, or are they actually, have they figured out, with everything that you have at that point, create a hologram to be that person's built-in assistant, or create a computer that can, I don't know, say the commands to the computer and have the computer do it instead of you having to look at the screen and use your touch screen. I mean, and there are touch screen devices nowadays that are actually very usable by the blind. But the point is, I guess I just want to see barriers broken around disability, which maybe Star Trek's headed there. I know that with Janeway, we had the first female captain. With Discovery, I guess we have some, I'm not as familiar with Discovery, but I understand we have some LGBTQ characters.
Yep.
Let's create some disability acceptance as well, because for all of the equal rights and freedom that the United Federation of Planets is supposed to believe in, let's start with our fellow human who can't manipulate a console because it's all touchscreen and visual and they can't see. Well, does that mean they are not capable of being a useful Starfleet officer?
Does it not come down to a choice of the application of technology? So, they have cured blindness by giving Geordi a visor, but they haven't made those beautiful LCARS display accessible and usable by people who are not sighted. They've chosen to go down the route of fixing what normal people perceive to be a disability rather than actually broadening it. Now, something that you said in an email, which was really interesting to me, was that you would like to see an episode of Star Trek where a planet applies for inclusion in the Federation and the entire planet is blind. None of them see.
That would be interesting.
Right. And how does that work? How are people from that planet, are they disqualified from Starfleet or forced to undergo surgery to enhance their sight? How does that work?
Or forced to put the visors on, or
right.
I mean, is it about curing the disability that they've had all their lives, Or is it about acknowledging, okay, these people are different from us. These people are really different from us.
And valuable
but they
and
are
worth.
but they are
And
also
have
valuable
worth,
and
right?
worth. Yeah, they are also valuable and worth. We've gone leaps and bounds in medical technology. Let's create a technology so that even as blind people, they're just as valuable as this entire crew who has eyes in the front of their faces that actually work.
Yeah.
And I know there are probably people that
with you.
would be like, well, why in the world would they even, I mean, put the visor on? Why would you? Well, if you are blind and long for that visor, then for your sake, I hope they create the visor. But I guess it might be a matter of, do you want your sight back, or do you want to be considered a valuable person in spite of your blindness?
And you,
I
as
would
a
like
human,
to be,
right, an autonomous person,
yes,
you should be allowed to be the one to make that decision, and you should be
yeah,
valued in society equally, regardless of the decision that you make, right?
yeah. And so should every person. I mean, if you're blind and you choose to get a visor or undergo a procedure and get your sight back, good for you. Live long and prosper. Have a wonderful life as a sighted person.
Yeah.
But for people who have never known anything but the blind life and don't want to experience, don't want to experience, don't want to be a baby trapped in a 40-something-year-old's body because their brain doesn't know how to interpret what they're seeing because they've never seen it before. If we choose to live as blind people but want to be valued and allowed to have the same rights as sighted people, we should be allowed that.
And theoretically, the Star Trek infinite diversity and infinite combinations, that whole philosophy that we think we aspire to, should allow, encourage, and celebrate that, right?
Start with your fellow humans. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great that you embrace that, the diversity of other, members of other species and, other planets. But let's start with our fellow humans. And like I said, Star Trek is far from over. Maybe we will make, maybe we will break some barriers in the blindness field. I mean, the only thing that I've seen was, like I said, Geordi and his visor, and then some. I know small amounts about Discovery. I know enough about it that I don't know. There was some scene where Captain Lorca and I don't know, some crewmate or admiral or somebody, I don't know, somebody was talking to him in his ready room, and he had to squint at her or something, and
because of his eyes.
Yeah, she's like, "You're visually impaired. Why don't you get your damn eyes fixed?" Yeah. I'm like, yeah, well, that's his choice, but
right.
So I mean, again, it's about, well, why don't you get your problem fixed? And to that, I would say, why don't you learn that my problem, as you call it, is a part of who I am, and stop trying to sidestep it and fix it.
Right. So tell me, what if you had an experience with one of the new shows where you thought, yes, that's how I would like to see blind people represented in Star Trek? What does that look like to you? What would you be seeing? What kind of things would happen that would make you go, yes, finally?
Well, I think it would be an interesting, I mean, I don't know, something happens on an away mission or something. Someone's clearly injured. Okay, get him to sick bay. Him, her, them, whoever. Get them to sick bay. Doctors reporting to captain. They're gonna survive, but the damage to their optic nerve or optic cortex or whatever, I don't know, whatever, is just irreversible. I can keep them alive. I can give them a good quality of life as best I can, but as far as their sight, there's nothing I can do.
Right.
They're blind. Then the rest of the episode is about, okay, there's nothing we can do to fix this. What do we do? In fact, maybe we should just go there. Are they medically discharged from Starfleet?
Yeah.
And then the captain's like, well, wait a minute, Admiral, with all due respect, this is a brilliant person and one of my most valued officers. And I'm not willing to just drop him off at the nearest starbase and say, well, thank you for your service. Have a wonderful life. And just leave them to figure out how to live knowing what they could have been. But because of this stupid accident that took their sight away forever, they're no longer allowed to be that. Forgive me for not being willing to just follow your orders, but I think this person is capable of being a valued officer in spite of their blindness. Let's make some accommodations. Okay, medically, there's nothing that can be done. So let's get some, I don't know, an engineer or some technologist to create, if nothing else, a hologram that can work with this person.
Yeah.
To, it's a team effort between the visual assistant holographic program and the officer who is now blind for life to do that, to do their collective job. The hologram's job is to help the blind officer do their job and live their full life as a blind person.
Right. So you're having a plot where somebody experiences blindness, but you're starting from they still have a really important job to do.
Yeah, they're experiencing blindness. And rather than the Admiral or whoever saying, well, drop them off at this starbase and we'll reconnect them with their family and, wish them all the best. But there's nothing they can do for Starfleet anymore. Yeah. Even if that is what the Admiral originally says, I want a captain to stand up to that and say, look, as this person's captain, as this person's friend, as this person's commanding officer who sees more in them than their blindness, they're a valued member of the Federation, of Starfleet, of this ship, and I'm not going to just abandon them just because they've lost their sight. And for all of the, again, as I've said before, for all of the equality that the Federation embraces, it seems to run counter to the Federation values that we take this wonderful Starfleet officer and say, well, you lost us at I can't see. You lost us at Dr. So-and-so saying, this person is blind and I cannot cure it.
And then they live happily ever after being the most awesome kick-ass officer on the entire ship for the rest of the series. I mean,
yeah,
I'm for it. I think
are made.
I think we should write that right now.
There.
Get on the phone to somebody and make that happen.
Yeah, who can I talk to at Star Trek? Who's
I don't know.
Listen to this, and I'll consult with them about blindness, and let's write this. Whether we're talking about an episode of Discovery or Prodigy, or what other series are coming up. Or if we create a whole series about Strange New Worlds, or if we create a whole series about a new ship on the regular mission of exploring Strange New Worlds, et cetera, and then a whole subplot, a very large maybe subplot, even the whole plot possibly, but probably not the whole plot, is Officer so-and-so, Lieutenant so-and-so, Commander so-and-so, even Ensign so-and-so, brilliant officer, Valued officer. Oh my God, they just lost their sight and there's something the doctors can do. What are we going to do now? Whatever it takes to maintain their value on this ship.
So, Anna, I'm curious, do you, as somebody who's blind, do you have any top tips for other people who are blind who want to enjoy Star Trek? What's the best way that you found? I mean, we talked about audio descriptive, which is sadly lacking, Star Trek people. The new shows are pretty good. But the older shows, I don't know what they're doing. I don't understand what the holdup is.
Yeah, please, Paramount Plus.
Yeah, get on that, please.
The Next Generation, Voyager, the original. Come on, please retrofit that with audio description. Come on, you guys can do it.
But for other blind or partially sighted people, do you have any top tips of how best that any tips or tricks that you use to enjoy it better? Other than listening to Daily Star Trek.
First of all, Daily Star Trek News does do a much better job at describing than like some.
Oh, stop! No, I was joking about that.
But okay. Is there anything that I can say to help blind Star Trek fans actually enjoy it? Unfortunately, until they this is why I'm so wanting audio description. I don't know what the secret is of advocating audio description in a way that actually brings it to people, but unfortunately, if audio description doesn't exist, I guess, well, it's what we unfortunately are stuck doing quite often in life itself. Is there any way you can enlist sighted, is there any way you can actually, I say, is there any way you can enlist someone sighted to watch it with you? And then it occurs to me, there is a service here. How about a way to plug this? My favorite service that exists in the 21st century is called AIRA, AIRA, artificial intelligence remote assistance. I'm not sure what the artificial intelligence part is, but it's an app on your smartphone. Unfortunately, if you don't have a smartphone, I would like to see AIRA come up with an app that works for people who don't have smartphones, but as of now, they haven't done it yet. But if you have an iOS, an iPhone or an Android phone, they have apps, and you use this app to connect with a human being, and they can use the camera on your iPhone to watch what you watch. So if you have, say, Paramount Plus on your Apple TV, or even Paramount Plus on your iPad or Android tablet or something, and you call from your phone, you can, with their help, position the camera in a way that they can see what you're seeing. And holding that camera for an hour, well, first of all, that would be kind of inconvenient. Secondly, you would be looking at, there's a budgetary aspect to this too, because as of right now, I mean, you can get AIRA for free and go. There's a growing, it's called AIRA Access Network. If you go to particular places, or you're going to particular websites who have decided that they're going to offer AIRA for free with their programs or websites or locations, you can get, some amount of, maybe, in some cases it's unlimited, in some cases it's like 30 minutes a day, in some cases it's, there are various ways to do that. Unfortunately, I'm afraid watching Star Trek, as of right now, does not qualify as an AIRA access task.
Plus, there's a lot of
Heartbreakingly.
hours. There's a lot of hours of Star Trek.
There's a lot of hours worth of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And, you know, the IRA agent isn't necessarily going to know. I mean, if you get lucky and get an IRA agent who knows Voyager, they would say, okay, Captain Janeway just walked out of the room.
Yeah.
But the IRA agent, you know, might not know it was Captain Janeway if they might say, okay, the lady just walked out, or the captain just walked out, or whatever. Yeah. I'm sure as they watched it, they would get familiar with it or somewhat familiar with it. Yeah. But the point is, I guess I'm saying a million words to say that one alternative way to get audio description where there is none is to subscribe to IRA. But that's, you know, if you can afford it.
Or get someone to help you if you have somebody who can.
Or if you have a friend, a sighted friend who turns out to be a Trekkie, you know, certainly ask them, hey, would you mind coming over, or I'll come see you, or how can we meet and watch us some Star Trek and you can tell me what the heck's going on, because there's some parts that I just can't get enough out of the dialogue, and darn them, they don't have it audio described yet. So, right. I mean, I love Star Trek, but what's this not audio described? Thank you, Paramount Plus, for having like Discovery and Prodigy.
Yeah, the newer ones.
Described. Thank goodness.
Yeah, but that doesn't help the classic.
That doesn't help those of us who want Next Generation, Voyager, et cetera, that doesn't have description yet. Let's retrofit them with audio description.
Right. Well, Anne, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really interesting, and it's really been valuable to hear your experience and how everything interacts with Star Trek and your blindness. I would love to see some more audio description, and hopefully we can, I don't know, maybe this will reach somebody that we can get a little better representation of people who are differently abled in Star Trek.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Anyway, let's keep talking, because I want to see how things evolve over time. And thank you as well, just for being a listener of Daily Star Trek News. It's a wonderful time to see you in the chat on the weekends and the live streams, and I really appreciate you being there and spending time with me. So thank you very much.
It's become one of the highlights of my weekend.
Oh, stop. All right. Well, thank you very much, Anne. And yeah, that's all for today.
Thank you so much.
All right, once again, I want to thank Anne for coming on the show and sharing her experiences. A couple of things we didn't actually get to talk about, but I wanted to make sure that I shared with you that were resources for blind or partially sighted people who enjoy Star Trek. So the first one is the Audio Description Project, or ADP. It's part of the American Council of the Blind. They maintain a list of audio descriptive tracks for movies and television shows. You can find that at adp.acb.org. And if you are a Paramount Plus subscriber, you can also find a Paramount Plus specific list of just of those titles. And that's at adp.acb.org/paramountad.html. So once again, that's adp.acb.org for that list of audio descriptive tracks that are available. Also, there's a Star Trek watch party that's put on by the iBlind Users Group, or iBug. They watch an audio descriptive episode of Star Trek and then get together to chat about it. You can find out more about that group and what they're doing, and also get involved at ibugtoday.com, and it's ibugtoday.com/Trekkie-talk. So that's ibugtoday.com/Trekkie-talk. You can find out more information about that watch party there. I'll leave links to all of these things in the show notes today down below. Thank you very much for watching. Live long and prosper.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.